Okay, so good morning everyone. My name is Mike Tansey from Silver Sands and welcome to our webinar on maximising your investment in Microsoft 365. Today, Andy will be running you through the concepts for managing your evergreen Microsoft 365 platform, focusing on the operational best practices and how to support your end users with this constant change. Before Andy does that, I'll be kicking things off with a Silver Sands introduction. So Silver Sands, we've been in business 34 years and we are a professional services organisation specialised in Microsoft consultancy and support to the enterprise market. So we focus on the following areas. So at the top, the large circle, it's Microsoft 365, which comprises of three key components. Firstly, it's Office 365 with applications such as Teams, Exchange and SharePoint. The second component is Windows 10 for your operating systems. And the third component is enterprise mobility and security for managing your endpoints and devices. The larger circle at the bottom left is the Power Platform, and it's where we've seen a lot of rapid growth for business applications, reporting and dashboards using Power Apps, Power Automate and Power BI. At the bottom right, we deliver both and manage both on-premises infrastructure solutions and cloud infrastructure solutions using Microsoft Azure. And the smaller circles around the edges for identity, governance and security are all crucial parts of a technical implementation to enable a seamless and protected end user experience. So linking all those circles together is our support banner. We offer managed services and proactive support contracts. But really at the heart of what we do is people and devices. We think that's the most important part. We deliver Microsoft approved change management and user adoption to embed that technology within your organization and to make it sustainable going forwards. And that's kind of the focus of today's session. So that's Silver Sands in a slide. I'd like to welcome Andy Petman, our senior consultant, to kick off the webinar. Over to you, Andy.
Thanks, Mike. Good morning, everyone. And my name is Andy. I'm a relatively new face at Silver Sands. I joined in around March after project managing some Microsoft 365 implementations for about 2 to 3 years previously. I've been really taken on to look at user adoption with one of my colleagues, but also with a particular bent on the business governance of the emerging Microsoft 365 platform that's coming out the other end of any project implementation. This is the first of 3 webinars. This one really is just a foundational one to go through a little bit about where we've got to, where you've got to, and to start introducing some concepts about the longer term need to manage Microsoft 365 as a service or as a product within your organization. As you start to see some of this, I'll be talking about some of my experiences where I've worked with organizations, either as part of Silver Sands or in my own right as an employee. And obviously, for some of it, I've had to make up assumptions. If we were in a room doing this as a proper sort of daily session, there'd be quite a lot of interaction. And that's a little bit more difficult on Teams. So sort of apologise for that and have to work within the constraints we have. So there is a fairly linear presentation here. If during the chat, as Mike mentioned, if you get any questions, you don't want to forget them by the end, or you even want them answering in the middle, please enter it into the chat box and Mike will either answer it directly if he knows that, or he can either break into the session or we can answer them a bit more interactively at the end. On the introduction slide, maximising the benefits of introducing something like Microsoft 365 was also tagged with Microsoft 365 is not just a project. That's a sweeping statement, and I wanted to go into a little bit about what I mean about that before I go into sort of wider longer term commitments to Microsoft 365 as a management exercise. So why is Microsoft 365 not just a project? A couple of things I have down here. In terms of it as a platform as a service or a bundle of applications that enable different either transformational or supporting capabilities within your organization, it is not just about the technical enablement product or a service or a security control or a different app on your app list. It is not just about that. It's about the background, about why you make those technical changes within your environment. It's understanding the business appetite to collaborate using these new tools, and it may be developing that understanding for the first time. There's about, I can't remember how many it is today, but there's over 30 applications in its entirety turned on for everybody either because of licensing issues or because of just other internal decisions you may have made. But the ones that you do have enabled, it's about understanding the appetite to collaborate and to work with using these new tools. It's also about understanding the need to establish some controls or terms of use or protocols, whatever you like to call it, around the way that the applications use, interact with, share, expose your data in new ways that you may not have ever thought about before. The wide remit of the portfolio around productivity, around collaboration, around communication, all inherently has elements of sharing something, whether it's a chat with something in it, which might be identifiable or sensitive, to a document, to a file, to another piece of business information that you need to think about. It's understanding what that business need is to use, and then what the business need is to control where necessary, where essential, and where possible as low impact to the end user, so they're not feeling the control that's applied. People want to use these applications. The first thing they would prefer not to hear is buts with every application, and that's the art, I think, in making Microsoft 365 a really good collaboration tool, where a lot of the controls and a lot of the understanding about how you're using your data within 365 is actually fairly invisible to the end user. Understanding your users and how to help them change the way that they work. That there is a really small bullet for one of the biggest pieces around Microsoft 365, is a change in the way we think about its use. If I think about my last organization before I joined Silver Sands, about 4,000 staff, around 170 sites, and traditional training, traditional communication methods, going out and going around everybody to train everyone in every application. And as we know, when we go to a training session, we usually pick up, I don't know, a couple of snippets, a couple of tidbits, or a process end to end, but not all the nuances and all the flavors in which way I might be able to use some of these new applications. And actually, that type of model of training and deployment is just not sustainable in any organization, unless they have a massive budget for a massive amount of trainers to go around every time either the application gets changed, features get added or removed, new applications appear. And it's understanding of a different way to engage with the organization, and for them to almost develop a way of self-service of some of the information they need to use the application to have access to. It's about devising a mechanism to introduce effective change. I'll go through this again in a moment on another slide, but Microsoft 365 as a platform as a service, you are not in control of the pace of change that things come out from Microsoft to you. You can control some of the changes through an effective evaluation process before it hits the end user base through one of your technical teams. Some of those changes can be gated and can be assessed and even tested against integrations or any other type of way you're using Microsoft 365 in your organization. But there are changes that just land. I'll come in this morning and something may have been subtly different in Teams to what it was yesterday. Sometimes some of those may not be very subtle. Some of them may be quite substantial, but they're still introduced at a pace of change that is outside of my control as a manager of my environment. And the principle of Microsoft 365 as a platform, all of those aspects to the way I think about Microsoft 365 being deployed, being used, and how we then think about the growth of the use of that environment to make much better use of our investment in the licenses, is none of those activities are really a one-off exercise. Whether you do have a technical implementation that makes a load of settings to enable applications, or whether you have a review of how an application might satisfy a business need today, that business environment might change tomorrow, and your use of the application might need to be thought about in a different context, in the way you talk to your users about the use, the way you talk to your business decision makers about the data and the way it's used within those applications as the use shifts. And just understanding how to communicate with the users in a very regular, very piecemeal way where it's not overwhelming, but they're able to keep up to speed with what's going on around the environment, whether it's you making the changes because of your organizational need, or whether it's coming from Microsoft because of their introduction of a change or a new application. It's about coming up with something that's effective. It reaches as many people as you can get, understanding we probably won't get to every single person in the organization, and that's okay. We cannot guarantee that, no matter how we do effectively communicate, train, or apply champion networks or other user adoption techniques. We may not be able to get to everybody, but we need to be able to ensure that we've given it in an easy to understand way, and it's timely and it's informative for them to make a choice about whether they either use a new app, use a new feature, decide not to if something changes in a way, and that's okay with 365 as well, because this is about developing a self-reliance with the staff to be able to respond to the changes that we're going to introduce to the platform as an organization, but also have introduced by Microsoft. Before I go a little bit further, this is just to recognize, again, as I mentioned, slightly less interactive because we're not in a room where we could do a bit of a tabletop exercise. But I'm just going to recognize some of the experiences I've had either from my previous organization or clients I've been working with more recently. Is where are we as a group of people in this session? Where are we with Microsoft 365? And hopefully a couple of these will resonate with you. So you may be, I'd imagine most of you are well into a path around Microsoft 365 in some way. It's partly why you may be here, but you may be starting or in the middle of a proper project to implement some or all of Microsoft 365. You may already have made a license shift. You may have gone towards a subscription service for Microsoft 365, and you may have in front of you a bundle of applications and capabilities. And some may have some framework around them, like moving towards SharePoint or Teams or OneDrive or any of the applications. You might have a strategy in place to look at a couple. And there may be the temptation or the urgency initiated by somebody, could be anybody, that might say, well, should we just have them all turned on and see what happens? And that's a pretty common position to be in. We've come across a number of organizations. In a way, I started on that principle with my last organization before we started looking at controls. I suspect very few organizations that have a Microsoft 365 capability have not thought about and even responded by now to the pandemic demands on the organization to work remotely, work from home, and to work in completely different ways. And I can't see people nodding around the room because I don't have your cameras on, nor do I have access to the team meeting environment here. But I suspect every organization has had to do something, and possibly involving teams, as I'll talk about later. Even before COVID, my experiences were that people in an organization where they knew Microsoft 365 were available, but we weren't quite ready to do things, possibly, or weren't quite sure how to do things while we were thinking about it, were being pushed by either staff or by managers of teams to want something to be turned on now because they know somebody who uses it, they've researched it, they're early adopters in the offing, they just can't wait to get going, but they are really giving a pressure to people who are the decision makers on what's available, and they'd like it now. And COVID actually has introduced that more, because clearly the more organizations that get teams enabled and would want to work across teams either for meetings or chat or other capability within teams are actually going to push organizations might not be quite ready. Actually, it's better if we all do it on Teams, and can we do it now? So there is an extra motivation for that. And some of you, as I felt my first iteration of this, we have deployed in a project. We had implemented what we thought were some quite robust operational procedures, and we were thinking, yes, that's done the job. Post implementation review, lessons learned and everything, and it was relatively successful as well. But, and this is where I go into some of the foundational stuff. And again, these are just experiences I've found, and you may have others and can easily say there's additional buts that you could put up on the screen with me. And this probably would have been a really good tabletop exercise, but hey. So Within a day, within a week, within a month, it doesn't matter timescales. This is purely more of the concept of the need. But Microsoft may release a new application. That might come from your technical team saying there's something ready to be turned on. Do we turn it on? That might be something that's just landed on the application list with just the briefest of information from Microsoft, but it goes straight out without a gate involved at all. It just appears on the application list for every member of your staff. Someone might phone up and say, I use this and it's now changed, or the feature that I use isn't there anymore, or something has changed and I don't know how to do what I normally do. And it's just disrupting business operations in some way. Something actually quite small could hamper a team. On a personal level, am I using an application in the right way? Am I allowed to use it as within the organization? Am I allowed to use it with external people? Where do I go to find out if I'm using it in the right way? How do I find out if I can go and talk to a partner organization like the NHS? If I talk to an organization that has its own well advertised and well publicized security controls, are our security okay to work with their security, and can we use teams across those boundaries? Can I use an application like something recently appeared is bookings? Can I use it? I've seen it on my list. What does it do? Why does it work with Outlook in that way? Can I use it publicly or privately within my organization? Can I use an element of Teams to do something else that I haven't been told I can, but shall I give it a go? Which app do I use? One of the biggest questions I have, certainly around task management, is which one is the right one to use, or which one is the best one to use? And that's around Planner, or around To Do, or around tasks in Outlook. And even then, those are changing, because I know with the Microsoft roadmap that they're planning on making some quite investment into the task management side of Microsoft 365. So again, me as a user can come up with those questions. Me as a manager will think, well, how am I going to deal with these? As a manager, I might think, actually, I've had a quick look, or I've got one of my staff to have a quick look at the basic reporting analytics that's available in the background. No one's using something. Is that because I'm not communicating well? Is it because it isn't hitting the mark in terms of the way a business team could use something? Is it important to me to worry about that, which is actually the starting point for me with anything to do with Microsoft 365? If something isn't being used, or something hasn't got the take up that I think about it, why? Do we expect it to be used? And then what's the context that we might be able to put around to help people understand how better to use it if it's important to us to see a use? As a manager within a team, so this is just a functional leader, a functional manager, service manager, can I start using something now? And again, this is pre-COVID in my mind rather than COVID, because there's probably quite organizational drives to do things differently. But prior to this, I had a lot of demand on my old team to get teams in quickly, and can I get my whole team working on it now? And can we start making use of its capabilities? And all of the answers to most of these are yes, but, yes, and what's the word, degrees of how quickly we can enable, or how quickly we can answer the questions. Finally, the last little one I get every now and then is, I'm sure I could do this yesterday, and that's my one I was doing this morning. I was just in Teams. I've already forgotten what it was because I've been for a few meetings already, but something just seemed a little bit different within Teams, and something just seemed a little bit odd this morning that I wasn't able to do. So when I think about the challenges that are presented by the previous couple of slides, and when I think about how we could then look at a project might do an implementation of 365, and or if I've got the right time with you to think about this, or you've already been thinking about this within your organization, you're thinking about the longer term commitment emerging from the delivery of something like a project 5, either in its entirety or for tactical deployments of applications. Converting that activity within a project which has got its project funding, it's got people ring fenced to that project funding, so you've got targeted people to deal with your technical and your implementation and your education, communications, and user adoption or training. What are the challenges that result from either the activity that's in progress, or actually going back and reviewing a project that's closed and thinking actually we're just missing something, but we don't know what. So some of the challenges, again, these are just experiences I've got from previous organizations and may not be exactly the challenges you have. But first of all, one of the things that I've found is that if we do a tactical deployment of something like Teams, which is one of our activities at the moment with a few organizations, accelerated Teams deployments, we do that very well. You do that very well. We do that as a group, not particularly thinking of me as a consultant here, but we do that very well because we need to do it to respond to a need, and we need to get it in really quickly. Now, within that implementation, whether it be a tactical one of one app or whether it be a slightly wider reasoning for turning on a number of apps, we may not have thought about, okay, what happens after the turn on? What happens after the flurry of activity to get our objectives, whether it's to chat better, to communicate and collaborate better, whether it's to share files over X, Y, and Z domains or whatever. This then goes back to what next? Do we move on to an app, or do we move on to securing and controlling and understanding what we've done first? Another challenge with Microsoft 365 is that we are introducing an onus on users to be more aware of their responsibilities. Self-service and self-reliance of why, when, how, where to use applications is a lot greater than it ever has been before. And in a way, that's the beauty of Microsoft 365, but it also places a responsibility on an organization to be able to facilitate the information for staff to be able to do that self-service. Where can they go to find out about change? Where can they go to find out about a capability to make an evaluation as to whether that product is suitable? Do they come to you and go through a bit of business analysis and a bit of solution design every time? Probably not. But it's understanding that gap that could be created by releasing 10, 12, 15, 20 apps without actually doing a little bit of curating of content from Microsoft to give your staff some context about how an application may be used within your organization. With 365 as a platform, as a service, IT is no longer the sole owner of the technology. It might be the first time you've ever come across this. It may not be. If you have a number of line of business applications, you've probably got a well-established model for setting up in the project, the analysis and the design and the delivery through to support and future development. That might be an accepted model that you already have for quite a few apps. I'll use SAP as a really agnostic example for me. It's just a product I've used before. It's a huge app and it requires a huge team, and it depends on the type of applications you generally use. That could be a large or a small demand on your organization. Why is 365 any different to the way that you treat one of those line of business applications? Another challenge around Microsoft 365 as an organizational think about how we look at 365 as a longer term proposition. We may not understand all of the skills of our organization. We may not have a good platform of education and training when people first come into the organization. We might not have that platform that we could then piggyback off of to develop content on that baseline. And how do we actually get to a point where we can identify, survey and assess and analyze those skills? Again, no accusation. I don't intend to make this a personal thing, but we've come across a number of organizations that may have no or little governance, or not appreciate the level of governance and controls that they need to have to make the best use and to make the best assessment of the risk they're willing to take with the new capabilities within 365. So there may be really good GDPR documentation policies and controls. There may be some really good information governance and IT security controls, but it's how to apply them to the Microsoft 365 environment. And the final one I've already referred to a little bit is the amount of pace of change that comes from Microsoft, sometimes unbidden and sometimes well communicated, but it's still the process and the roles that you might have around your existing change management are going to be severely tested by the pace of change that comes from having a product, including 30 odd applications and quite a number of underlying services that support that. So without further ado, I'll go into a proposal of a model and some hopefully recognized disciplines that we need to bring together to look at the longer term management of Microsoft 365. So first of all, just basic explanation. This is going to form part of the foundations for most of my discussions for this remaining part, and then for the next two workshops where we delve into this bit deeper. So in the middle there, the consistent is that we've got people, we've got apps, we've got files, and we've got devices. This is not a technical session. This is not about securing those environments. We're on the presumption that you've either done that or will do that, but that's just a well-recognized constant within the middle of all the discussions I'm going to have for the next 2.5 hours now, but looks for over the next 2 weeks after this. Layered on top of that is a number of things that I will have thought about as I introduce Microsoft 365. So this might be part of my team that I put together. Now, under this, there are some assumptions, like there is a technical team that's doing the work around those users, apps and devices and files. There's a technical Microsoft 365 and or SharePoint and or any other capability, either in the one person if you're a small organization, or you might have a small team that do that. But the technical enablement in the background around those four icons in the middle are sort of a given for the rest of the conversation. So I'm not excluding them. It's just that I've got them in there, but they're more of a feed to the operational management rather than totally critical, because they will probably respond to decisions rather than make decisions. The team that I put around there are, and again, something I should have mentioned at the beginning, this is scalable. There's nothing about this where you suddenly need to introduce 5 or 6 new functions or 5 or 6 new roles or 5 or 6 new bodies of people. This is around the capabilities that could be in 1 or 2 or 3 people, and it is completely scalable on the size of your organization. In my mind, when we're talking about this, it can be a team if you've not got operational management as a discipline and you haven't got line of business applications. If you do have those, a lot of these will already be done by your people, but it's just a recognition that they could be brought together in a different group for a different purpose. So as I think about deploying Microsoft 365, I might have brought in some people around compliance and information governance and GDPR, so just around my information security side of things. I would have certainly made use of comms, whether I'll have done it as part of my project or I've had someone from comms helping me. User adoption, as I mentioned earlier, that also encompasses training and any other education channel that you may use. Support, that's primarily around the IT support desk or the first line help desk that you might have, where people go to with either break fix calls and or how do I, why do I calls. The security one is around the security of the IT environment, so that's IT security. And the final one being strategy really is a hint towards, as I think about a project, there'll be a strategy within the project, and there may or may not be, depending on how much of a future thinking I have on my head at the time, maybe wider organizational strategy. But the strategy there is within team, within project, within delivery of some 365 capability. What I'm going to talk about a little bit is that's my little internal group that I think of throughout the duration of this. I'm going to start talking about some of the influences I might have that I need to respond to if I've introduced Microsoft 365, completed the project, and possibly walked away with or without what I call sufficient or good enough ongoing governance to allow me to be able to respond to some of these influences. So the first one, I'm not going to be able to get away with this without bringing back in COVID, but we have had demands on us, all organisations. We've had the same as many of you probably have already had to continue operating. We've had to work from home, and that's introduced some changes, even for us as quite great users of Microsoft and obviously great supporters of it. But we've had to make some adjustments internally, and so will you. Did you have a project to do it, or did you turn it on really quickly and just hope? Did you have support from somebody like Silver Sands or any other organisations that help you do your IT enablement? Have you made compromises around the way you've implemented over the way you otherwise may have done? And that might even contain some compromises you're not even aware of yet. Now that could be realized by following the implementation and getting everyone successfully working from home as much as you could. You might then think, I'll need to review the current risk that we've introduced, or you may just move on to the next project and turn on OneDrive or turn on something else or do something else business critical to your organization as a response to COVID, which is nothing to do with Microsoft 365. This isn't a black and white, and you might disagree with some of my coverings there, but in the middle, I've just identified the types of teams that I might need to re-invoke to address some of those activities. So introducing teams or introducing a new capability within teams certainly might have affected my compliance with our internal information governance controls. I need to talk about it, so comms. I need to tell people about it, so user adoption. I need my support to deal with the calls and in a new way because everyone's working from home. They're not able to pop in. Actually might be a good thing. And then IT security, because we're introducing something that's allowing us to expose our data and our chat and our conversations to the outside world potentially. Another influence could be a regulatory change, and I've just identified there Brexit and GDPR, a very big looming exercise by the end of the year. Hopefully preparations have been underway, but there will be things that come out of this as we understand the exit rules, the exit boundaries, and the actual, I was going to say strategy, it's not, it's the tactical enabling that exit. It's going to have a change on the way we use our data. It may be around where your data is held, maybe about who you work with if you work internationally. It could be any effect on the organization. And in a way, I have that there, and I don't know yet what some of these are going to be. But again, who does somebody contact when they're told what they are, and how soon have we got these changes? So what changes are required and when? What's the impact to our 365 environment? And don't forget, this will be a issue that will affect quite a large part of your organization around finance, procurement strategies, other non-365 things. So it's identifying that you have a need, what potentially could be quite a vulnerable and large environment, and you might need to do it quite quickly. How do you invoke the people needed to make these assessments and changes? Then once you know what the changes are going to be, what's the message to the staff and who are the staff that you need to talk to? Is it all? Is it everybody in the organization? Is it only subsets depending on the type of changes that are going to be introduced? Again, I've identified they're more or less the same group, and there's a theme going to emerge by the end of this, I'm sure you'll see. But again, all of that compliance, communications teams or communication support for you to get content material and information out to staff about what's going on, your IT support staff and your IT security, they're all going to be involved in this because it is going to be around data, it's going to be around use, and it's going to be around the location of that data and how people use it. Another scenario we have is change that comes in from Microsoft. And I've mentioned before, there are some change that we can influence how it gets released to the users, and that's through your IT function. And that's where their inherent involvement in this is already stated at the beginning. And I just reiterate it so I don't forget that we've got IT somewhere in this bundle. There is some work that will come from Microsoft that may not hit IT first in order for you to assess and communicate the impact. And you might almost be playing catch up to things you see on the morning that you log on as a user, as well as a communicator or a user adoption specialist or a support person. And if you've had Microsoft 365 for any period of time, you probably are aware and have already been involved in those scenarios already. But an application change that's coming up soon is that videos recorded through meetings, for example, are going to very soon no longer be held in stream, but they're either going to go to OneDrive for the person who initiated the recording, or to a Teams channel if it's a Teams meeting that's been initiated recording within there. Now that's quite a substantial change because, for example, you may have only turned on Teams, but you'd enable recording. Now, from that point of view, the recording is available inherently within the Teams chat, but you're suddenly talking about it going into OneDrive. Have you turned OneDrive on yet? Have you got your policies and your controls and your understanding about how you'd like it to be used within the organization in a safe and legal fashion already communicated to the staff? You may already be well down the route of OneDrive, but it's a subtle change to the way OneDrive is being used today, and it might have an impact on the way you want to talk to your staff about it. So what is that change? What impact has it on the users as a whole, a community, or specific areas where recording of meetings might be more in use, like a tribunal team, where they work in the legal context and record the meetings for a specific purpose? What's the risk of the move into OneDrive? The risk for me may be that if you don't have OneDrive turned on, it's a major risk because your staff may not be able to access videos that they initiate the recording of. And then how do we tell them? And again, won't be any surprise, we have the same bundle of people. Usually, again, I'm ignoring the strategy because a lot of what we're talking about is reactionary changes brought in by external influences. The last one I just thought of as it's an internal influencer, but it's external to the Microsoft 365 environment and the team you may have or have had in a project. And this one for me was a really big one in my last organization. We separated a function into two under directors, and that had a substantial wake-up call for us around how we were looking at our longer term use of Microsoft 365. Because splitting a team into two who had a high reliance on SharePoint and an emerging reliance on Teams, this was before COVID, and a use of OneDrive, probably not as well controlled as it was with people running their own mini team sites in OneDrive, had a major problem for us because we then suddenly thought, who on earth are we going to talk to and how do we bring together the people necessary to initiate the technical changes in the Microsoft 365 environment and to successfully remove the data from one team's view, place it into another, and ensure that the new matrix of who does what in which team see the right data and don't see any data they're no longer entitled to see. That is for us, it was a really big exercise, and it was one of the biggest initiators around a regular team that was going to be able to be convened that had repeatable, predictable processes to be able to respond to this type of change. And that's where I'm hinting towards now a lot more about this longer term governance piece as being that repeatable, predictable team that people know about, know the existence of, and can go to initiate a dialogue about something they need to work on as a change. So this one, again, it comes back to the boxes on the left are very similar to the others. And it's the same questions that we need to think about as a group. And that's what is it, who's affected and whose data is involved. I'm not going to probably do anybody much of a disservice, but usually this type of thing is usually the last thought about questioning a change in facilities teams, where the teams do all of their lifting, shifting, thinking about how and when they're going to move. And this is really one of the biggest wake-up calls. IT cannot be the last to be involved because it is a very large exercise and it could be a very large impact to other plans that the organisation might have put in place before it gets to the actual lift and shift of a weekend's hard work for furniture and fixtures and fittings. And how do we do it is actually an emerging new piece of work that would need to be thought about and approached as a mini project in some cases, and then put to bed with the lessons learned so that we come up with something that we can then repeat again the next time we do it. How do we do that? And how do we respond to all these other influences, either internal or external? And that is where we come towards the idea that we introduce strategy into our thinking rather than just doing the reactionary change to things that come from Microsoft or from a business team needing to separate or amalgamate, or things like the pandemic, where a lot of it has been a little bit knee-jerk. This is to bring together the idea that we need to think about it in a different way. And that's where we work with strategy, external to the team. And that could be business strategy. So what does a business want to achieve? Long term, short term, middle term, where it's in place sometimes in some organizations, and how it connects to the IT team as a group of people and their own strategies and their own demands on their environments that are independent of the business long-term goals of what they want to try and achieve, with everybody in the organization working together in this way or that way, or using X, Y, and Z applications or products. The IT teams will have their own need around server replacements, storage replacements, and their own drivers. You'll have internal and external, so you'll have internal rules around things like finance procurement, but you'll have external legislation like for government, NCSE guidelines and other external influences on the organisation. And you'll have your own industry specific drivers around how you work, where you work, and what you do with the data and the content that you use to do your work. So how do we bring that together in a bit of a strand to incorporate all these disciplines into one? And this is where I really come in with the cliffhanger in a way, because I've looked at the time, but this is actually exactly the right time as well. This is where I talk to you a lot more over the next 2 sessions about the development of a discipline around managing 365 for the future, managing 365 as you may, if you already do, some of your other substantial investments in business applications, but also scalable and appropriate to what your organization is able to deal with, either in risk or in people and resources. And it's how we come up with a couple of tools and techniques to get you started if you've not thought about this in any real depth, or if you have already, how we might be able to help in scaling back some of those really big, what I call the really big bubble ones. When I thought about this in my last organization on my second iteration of 365, I broke down a lot of what was monumental or monolithic challenges. When I first implemented, I wanted to do everything perfect, not totally me, but there's the drive of the project was to do all the information architecture around our documentation, our SharePoint and our teams, to do all of our security controls, to do all of our GDPR, and to do and as you can already feel, I'm building up that bubble of frustration and sort of where do I start? What I will go through at the next session is a little bit how you break into that and how you can break down that really big bubble into some really achievable chunks that deliver capability to the business without doing the really big design that holds up that delivery. So that, in essence, is what I wanted to go through today as a foundation for the next couple of workshops. What I've just got here is, I can't remember who it was yesterday, someone said my face is on there too much. I agree. Now I've looked at it again, it's even worse on a big screen. But I am new to Silver Sands, so I want to stamp my presence all over the place. But yes, next Wednesday or Tuesday rather, I'll be doing some work on getting started with Microsoft 365 management. So what is the starting point with the thinking if you haven't already? For some of you, you may already have gone down that path, but not quite got to the other end of it yet. And that's great, that's fine. But I'll, in the usual onion peel method, I'll start off simple and then I'll start going down into some real depths about how you can scale and how you can start working with a team to implement some real good change around your Microsoft 365 environment. The next webinar after that will be more about developing. So you've got the foundations, you've started thinking about it. You may, and it's only a week later, so you probably won't have done anything, but on the principle that you may be thinking about developing a operational support model around your Microsoft 365, actually how you can use that team that's emerging to start working with other parts of the business, higher up the chain, driving and working into more organizational strategy, so you can start beginning to use Microsoft 365 as a strategic enabler for some of your objectives and goals. So that's really the end of my little piece on the foundations of operational management. Mike, is there any questions in there?
Hi, Andy. Yeah, we did have one question come through in 2 seconds. When is the right time to think about the ongoing commitment to M365?
It's very easy to be glib, and it's just to say now. One of the things, again, I did this on 2 organizations and we've been advising since I moved into Silver Sands. Nobody is at the perfect point for this. The perfect point for this maybe even before you convene the first project, to start thinking about moving to Microsoft 365, whether it's a license uplift from Microsoft as part of your ongoing relationship with Microsoft, or whether it's a practical, I like Microsoft 365 and I want to implement it. If it was ideal, then I'd say probably at the starting point of a project scoping, operational management should always be the goal at the other end of the project. So in a way, your project does just evolve into a working model that carries on beyond transition to live and into business as usual. But there's nothing wrong with, and as I'll go through a little bit more detail next week, you can do this well after you've delivered and the project team themselves have been disbanded. So the right time probably is now.
Thank you, Andy. Just had another one direct message. Thanks, Andy. How does the operational management actually help me get the value from my M365 subscription?
Okay, so getting the foundations right, getting the building blocks right, you're going to do you're going to do a number of potential things, and it's as a holistic approach. Number one is you have a well-managed environment, so you have either less reduced risk or mitigated risk in terms of breaches and fines for bad or breach use of data. You have established communication in place that reduces the number of calls on your service desk because they know where to go to. One of the things I will talk about, and I know not all organizations either have or intend to deploy something like Microsoft Learning Pathways, which is the internal communication site around the use and training of Microsoft 365. But one of the things I will be talking about is a regular communication plan and a regular communication method that allows people to know what change is coming in monthly, daily, weekly, whatever the pace of change is from Microsoft. Even before you look at your own internal change, you're getting that message out there that people can actually start looking at the roadmap or start looking at your interpretation of the roadmap and start to apply those changes in their heads before the change hits on the Monday morning or the next morning they turn in. Also, the culture moving towards a more self-reliant, a little bit more around self-service and self-education. And again, we'll talk about that next week in a little bit more detail. But again, they're getting more responsive to the changes that are going on, and also the changes in the way they can use an application to work for them without needing the approach to a central management team to say, oh, I need to get together with some business analysts to find out what you're doing, come up with a design of an outcome that you want to get, and then train all your staff in how you do it. That's less of a suitable model for this. It's more about enabling people to think for themselves, identifying more the questions like how and why, rather than just waiting for someone to tell them what to do. And the other side of that is on your side of it as a person who might ask that question, is having the team that can go to for all of those scenarios and many more that I talked about in terms of responding to organizational or external influences change much quicker, much more responsive. And actually, you're not going to get hamstrung by something coming in left field without having this repeatable, predictable team that you could call on to make a response to a change.
Yep, thank you for that. It's a very detailed answer. So potentially the same person's asked, typing another question now. Oh no, that's stopped. Does anyone else have any other questions at all? No. Okay. With follow-up questions, we will be sending over this slide deck with a copy of the recording. But just say thank you, Andy. I thought you posed a number of really thought-provoking questions there around the ongoing management of Microsoft 365. Really like the bit around not seeing it as a fixed project with a deadline, but rather an ongoing business strategy. So just to highlight, we do offer a number of fixed price starters for 10. One in particular to mention is the first one here. It's the Microsoft 365 Managed User Adoption Service. This is where we can come in, work with you to develop a practice and a service around the operational concepts that Andy's talked about today, and we can discuss it in more detail. If you do want any more information, I'm about to post a survey within the chat. And if you want some further discussions with one of our experts like Andy or Linda, just tick that on the last box and we'll be happy to get in touch. And just finally as well, the future links, as Andy said, it's one of 3 parts in the webinar series. Please do register, please do share this internally, and give Andy a quick thumbs up if you've enjoyed the session today. But yeah, thank you everyone, and thank you, Andy.
Yeah, thank you all. Hopefully see you next week.